Today I'm meeting with Shannon Hickman, and she's an LCSW, and I'm going to leave her to be the one that tells us the subject matter we're going to discuss today. But Shannon, before we do start about that, would you please give people that would like to speak with you later after watching this video your name and contact information so they can know how to get a hold of you?
Sure. My name is Shannon Hickman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also an AASECT certified sex therapist. My practice is here in Murray, Utah, and the name of my practice is Core Healing Counseling, and I can be found on the web at corehealingcounseling.com.
And that's all one word, Core Healing Counseling, no dashes, spaces,
no dashes,
underscores?
no spaces. Corehealingcounseling.com.
Is there a number to call?
It's 801-554-0849.
Thank you. What are we going to be talking about today?
So I thought we could start by kind of talking about what one of the issues that can often lead to divorce and lead to problems in a relationship, which is when one or both individuals in the marriage or relationship is dealing with being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse.
And that does come up as a divorce lawyer, because that's why I wanted to speak with you, and that was kind of you to come up with a subject that's so fitting. I do see that a lot. I see a lot of marriages coming to an end, but because of sexual abuse, but not in the means or the manner you might expect. So what is it about childhood sex abuse that is such a problem for married couples, or can be?
Sure. So I think just to start off, I'll just give you a little bit of background in it. So the prevalence is probably underreported, but they estimate that 1 in 4 females will be or has been the victim of sexual abuse, and 1 in 6 males. And they do believe this is underreported because people don't feel comfortable coming forward with what has happened to them when they were young. So the reason it shows up in relationships and can be such a problem is because when you've been the victim of sexual abuse, it can be very lifelong damaging and have later sexual effects that show up in the relationship or in the marriage.
And are the members of the couple aware of this in all cases, or some cases, or no cases?
I think in a lot of cases they are not aware of it. For a lot of people, they may minimize what has happened to them when they were growing up, or feel like they don't want to be seen as a victim, and they want that power and control. And so a lot of times it doesn't show up until the individual is in a committed relationship or in a sexual relationship with a spouse or with a partner.
So if somebody, let me ask, when does it manifest itself? Because in other words, if I've been sexually abused as a child, when will it start to affect my relationship with my spouse or even my potential spouse? I mean, I guess the question I'm asking here is, well, then why don't people who have these issues address them before marriage? What is it about marriage and that time in their lives, or why does it become such a problem? Why can't they address it sooner than later? Why aren't they addressing it sooner than later?
And I think because for a lot of people, they don't know the effect it's going to have on them, because for many people, the first real close, intimate relationship and connection they have with someone is with their partner or with their spouse. And for a lot of people, the first sexual experience they have is with a spouse. And so they may have thought that they had put it behind them, or it wasn't a big deal. For some people, they actually don't even know that they've been sexually abused because they've repressed a lot of those memories. And then as soon as they're touched or have any type of physical stimulation or arousal,
that's similar to what happened to them, that can
exactly,
trigger the
and it triggers the memories.
Well, let me ask this. Now, this is going to sound a little naive of me, but I don't mind. Why would it be then that it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm missing something, but well, if you have feelings for each other, yes, and especially in Utah where we have a strong LDS community and other faiths as well where they don't believe in premarital sex.
Right.
You can still kiss and you can still hug. Why doesn't that trigger it? Where if somebody says, "Oh, you know what? I'm starting to fall in love with this person, but when then I got kissed or I was hugged or I was touched or something like that." Why doesn't that raise red flags in these people's minds? Why is it that it's when they get married and then when all hell can break loose? That's a question I have. Why is it that why does the courting and the dating and that sort of stuff, why doesn't that trigger it? Or does it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it actually can trigger it depending on the severity of the abuse. And sometimes things can be okay for a couple of years, 3 or 4 years, and then all of a sudden, depending on maybe what's going on in the relationship or whatever triggers are coming about for the person, these memories can surface or these feelings can surface. And for a lot of these individuals, they have a very difficult time with interpersonal relationships and with intimacy and even close friendships because they've had that trust broken at such an early age that it's very difficult for them to get close to other people.
Without them knowing it, because they might have said, "Oh, well, everybody's living the same kind of life I am. I don't trust anybody just as nobody trusts me."
Mm-hmm.
It's not unusual or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think that they might think, that things are going well and we are having a good relationship and we are kind of close, but as time goes on in these marriages and relationships, people get much closer and much more, I think, maybe feel much more vulnerable and open. And when they try to express some of that, or their partner does, all of a sudden it triggers it because it's a place that's not safe for them to go.
Thank you. Here's another thing I was going to ask. Not that I want to lump every victim of abuse into the same category, but are there some situations where people that have been sexually abused as children, then they reach adulthood and contemplate marriage, they may have certain personality traits that have developed over time, like you say, they may have trust issues, they may be withdrawn and things like that. So what kind of people get attracted to them? Do you see what I'm saying?
I think it really depends. For some people, it may be that they kind of see that the other person has a need and they want to fulfill that need. So maybe a really helping, kind of sensitive, caring person. For a lot of these individuals, it might even go totally the opposite way and might be somebody that isn't very emotionally connected and is fine having that kind of relationship because the person that has been the victim can't offer any more than that. So that feels safe for them too, depending on how they grew up and what their childhood was like and how they feel about connection and intimacy. And so I think it could go both ways, definitely.
Is it basically polarized though, or is it anywhere along the spectrum?
I think it's anywhere along the spectrum. And what we see is people can end up being very, like you said, kind of isolated and withdrawn and really avoid these close relationships, or sometimes it goes the other way and they're acting out some of these fantasies and connection and they might be hypersexual because of it, because of what they've experienced.
So, people I encounter frequently are, we had a good relationship before our marriage, but then, and so that led us to desire to get married, and now all this weird stuff's happening, either with the husband or the wife. I mean, do sexually abused people attract each other, or is that kind of a random thing?
I would say that's probably kind of a random thing, but
so we
I
won't
don't
talk
know
about
the
that.
statistics on that.
So we'll just, so then they get married, and then what kind of problems will somebody who has, so they start to become sexually intimate, and then it triggers a bad memory of the abuse, what happens then? I can't.
Right.
I can't speak to this because I haven't experienced it. Thank goodness. So, as one who has talked to people without, of course, violating any confidences, can you give us an idea? So what happens? So it starts to get hot and heavy or something like that, and then what happens? They just break off. Somebody runs into another room, or what?
They might break down. They might
start crying,
fall apart, start crying, and what happens a lot of times is, depending on the severity of abuse, victims kind of describe it as, and it's called dissociating. So what that means is they have been disassociating from their body so they can actually kind of get through the trauma that's happening to them. So they're completely disconnected from their body, and they even have kind of termed it being a spectator. So they describe it as almost watching from someplace else in the room because they're so disconnected, and that can happen later on. Again, something can trigger that, and all of a sudden they disassociate and they're not present anymore with their partner, or like we said, maybe crying, fall apart, have to get out of the situation. Maybe that fight or flight response kind of comes up and happens.
So is there
and
anger?
They have to get out.
Can it manifest itself in anger?
It can manifest in anger, rage, and there's kind of two types that these people have experienced. PTSD would be more of a singular, one-time incident, maybe like an accident that you've witnessed, or some sort of traumatic event that happened one time, and they have all kinds of maybe flashbacks or nightmares, anxiety, depression, and the other piece to this is sometimes it manifests as what they call complex trauma, which is maybe, for example, a woman who has been repeatedly abused by a father or brother. This not only develops into symptoms of PTSD, but even goes further than that and becomes very chronic and very difficult.
How do for lack of a better term, how does the innocent spouse typically react? And if you want to talk about somebody who reacts to the sadness and the falling apart or the anger, do they I guess it's probably getting to be a little more well known in our culture. Somebody might go, well, I wonder if there was some abuse here. But my guess is that would be a pretty open-minded, pretty self-aware kind of. So how do they react? They get mad too?
Rejection.
They feel
rejection. They feel sad, misunderstood. They don't understand why their partner doesn't want to be with them in this way.
Because this partner didn't say, "Oh, I've broken down because I just remembered sex abuse." What?
No,
so
they don't want to share it with their partner because they're afraid they might leave. It's shameful. It's embarrassment. They feel guilty, and for a lot of people, I said this already, but they don't want to be seen as the victim because that means they no longer have control. They never had any control, and a victim in our society is not seen as a good thing.
And is there a fear of I don't want to admit to being damaged goods?
Yes.
Not because I am,
yes,
but because I perceive myself as that, and my secret will be out.
Yep.
I'm not as
good
good
as
as
they might leave, and they might not love me as much,
and
they'll reject me. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So now I just found out that my spouse is a victim of sex abuse. That's not fair to me. I didn't want to have this kind of burden. I didn't want to marry somebody like that with these kinds of problems. Once I've pitied myself and I do that, then I might say, okay, well, this is frustrating. These are some setbacks and some challenges I didn't expect to have. But now I've kind of gotten over that. I feel bad about how selfish I was. What do I do now with this person? But I also still have selfish desires. I want a healthy sex life.
Right.
What am I going to do? Where do I start? I don't know. I haven't had, my spouse has not come to me and said, I have abuse issues. But I'm thinking that might be what it is. I watched Shannon, I listened to her. I'm getting clued in here now. What do I do, whether I'm a husband or wife? What would you tell people? How would you approach that?
I think if you are the person that's experiencing and have experienced the trauma, and you are willing to start seeking help, make your partner a part of the process. But as for a partner, you need to be very patient and loving, kind, understanding, and I would say very reassuring. Let them know that you love them no matter what, and that you'll stand by them and help them through this process, but encourage them to get help, because many
Shannon,
times
I do
this
that.
is not going to get better.
I do a lot of that, and it's just not sinking in, or it's actually not being believed. What's wrong? If somebody told you that, it's like, I am being understanding. I want to be understanding. I'm very supportive. My heart aches for my spouse. I didn't know this about him or her.
Right.
And it hasn't actually made me feel worse. It makes me feel, in a sense of pity and a sense of desire to help, and I want to help heal. But my efforts are being rebuffed. My efforts are being treated either with indifference or with as if I'm not worthy of trust. When people are, is that pretty normal?
I would say probably more often than not, the partner, if they are supportive, they could probably encourage and help the person that has been the victim.
And they are receptive
of
to that
abuse,
more often
yes.
than not. Okay,
Yes.
so I won't talk about that anymore. Because in my line of work, I often see that. It's like, look,
They're not receptive.
I was trying, and it just wasn't
Mhm.
getting anywhere. And I guess some trauma goes deeper, where it's
And-
not your fault, but this person has bigger problems than you might be prepared
And they
for.
have to be willing to want to take a look at it. If they're not willing
Okay.
to look at it, sometimes it can be, this isn't usually something that happens with one little breakthrough after you go to one therapy session. This can be, weeks, months, years of therapy to heal from something like this. So I think it's important to understand that just like with anything, with alcohol, with substance abuse, it really has to start from within the person that needs to work on whatever it is.
When somebody realizes after marriage and marital intimacies and things like that, oh wait, something's been triggered in me that I didn't anticipate, I don't like it, now I'm kind of shying away from sex with my spouse. Are you saying that if you have an understanding spouse, that these are the kind of spouses, these sex abuse, these victims, they're willing to get some help more often than not?
Yes.
Do they know where to look?
I don't know that a lot of people do. So I think it's really important to find somebody who's trauma informed, who specializes and deals with childhood survivors of sexual abuse, or if it's been an incident of maybe stranger rape or date rape as an adult. You really want to find somebody who has worked with this a lot and understands it. And then I think not only do you do individual therapy, but also bring the spouse in or the partner in and do couples therapy as well, just to help them kind of understand and help guide them in a positive direction of how do we now have a sexual relationship. And sometimes it is putting it on hold for a while that individual is working through whatever happened to them, and then being very understanding going forward that sometimes, depending on the triggers, even after maybe several years of working on it in therapy, there still might be something that triggers a memory, and being understanding when the partner says, I need to take a minute. I need to take some deep breaths and maybe do a little muscle relaxation to get present and mindful again, and then maybe we can start again, or it's so bad, maybe we can do this another day. So that kind of understanding.
Not a quick fix.
No, definitely not.
Not easy steps to take, even if it might take, okay. And this is on both ends. This is you're going, as the spouse of this sex abuse victim, you didn't bring any of this on yourself, but you're going to have to suffer along with your spouse, and if things are going to get better. What kind of, can you do anything to help soften that blow at all?
So I think that these individuals who do go to therapy and want to work on this have the ability to reclaim their sexuality and have really wonderful sex lives, but it does just take time. And I think with anything, the death of a loved one, maybe an addiction within the marriage, there's a lot of things that take time to heal. And you and I were talking earlier about couples kind of going on this journey together, and I always tell couples, you got on this plane together and you didn't go without your baggage. You didn't go without your luggage. We all bring something to the marriage and something to the table, and this is a difficult one, definitely, to deal with, but I think as with anything, if you can come through it and deal with it as a couple and together, you're going to be stronger in the long run.
That brings to mind something else you talked about, which was that there are professionals that you particularly find you helpful that are like a lot of problems that you have in your marriage, irritations and things like that, are permanent. That doesn't mean that the marriage isn't worthwhile.
No.
But you can't, even all the therapy in the world and all the good intentions in the world aren't going to eliminate some of the bothersome and irritating things that are part of being married.
Right. And I told you earlier, but John Gottman, he says that 2/3 of couples' problems are perpetual. So a lot of these problems are going to continue, but it's the way you communicate, it's the way you talk with one another, it's the way you form trust in your relationship and connection that really kind of makes or breaks the relationship. And for a lot of couples, so I kind of come from the school of thought that I think therapy, if you find the right therapist, can be extremely beneficial for anybody at different times in their lives, especially premarital therapy or therapy in the beginning of the relationship, because we come from very different backgrounds. So in my practice, what I find is that most couples wait far too long, and they speculate that from the time one or both partners says we should go to therapy, the couple actually doesn't set foot in a therapist's office for about 5 or 6 years after that. And it's too long. It's too long to wait. So it's better to get someone to help with the communication and help with whatever's going on earlier rather than farther down the road.
And I realize not only is it 5 or 6 years you don't get back, but it's also 5 or 6 years for things to get worse and get aggravated.
Contempt, conflict, Gottman
Resentment.
talks about the 4 horsemen and contempt being number one, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, these unhealthy patterns of communication, and the longer they go on, the oftentimes more difficult they are to break. So
one of the things I'm getting from this conversation is that if you encounter, and again, in a way it comes as a surprise to both people. I had repressed or forgotten my sexual abuse. I thought that marriage was just going to be one next happy step along a life of other wonderful things, and now it has come as a shock to me. And then my spouse is even more shocked in some respects, because that was something that wasn't even brought up. But what you're saying is, no, they can have a happy and normal sex life.
yes.
But that doesn't mean that they will have no marital problems. There will still be arguments over money. There will still be arguments over who is the more strong-willed. If there are children born, there's going to be late nights and exhaustion and having to put the kids before yourself and your relationships. Those are normal. Those are in some ways character building, but you cannot figure out a solution to every problem. Some of them are simply things you have to live through.
Yes.
And so I come away from this thinking, I think some people say sex abuse. Damaged goods for life. What would you say to somebody who feels that? Because I have to admit, that's sometimes what I think. It's like, if I found out that my spouse was a victim of sex abuse, I might be like, poor me. What did I deserve to do? What did I do to deserve this? And now I'll never have a fulfilling, intimate relationship with my spouse, and that's not fair. And I feel a little cheated because I find it hard to believe that this was conveniently overlooked. I feel duped or something like that. Could you describe, just as we finish, kind of what that process is and how that couple, I mean, I guess in a way, it would be like also saying if there's been infidelity in a marriage, that doesn't mean the marriage must or should end. But that's nice to hear, but that sounds easier said than done. How do, and you've touched on it. It can take weeks, months, years, but could you give us a kind of maybe a thumbnail sketch of they've now come to the decision that some therapy will be sought. What happens next? How often do they meet? You know, knowing that it could be months, weeks, years, but how often? Is it once a month, once a week? What's the cost? Does insurance cover it? I think those would be some good things to talk about.
Sure. So depending on the therapist, I'll just start with that last question. Depending on the therapist, insurance does cover it. And typically I would say therapy, it depends on what part of the country and probably part of the world you're in, but here in Utah, most therapy, if you're paying out of pocket, is about anywhere from $90 to probably $130 to $150 per session, so it can get a little bit costly. A lot of therapists have a sliding fee scale you can ask about, which depending on your income can reduce the price for you. And I think one of the things to...
By the way, does a reduced price also result in reduced quality?
No, definitely not. Hopefully not, right? Not if the therapist is good. So I think one of the things that you're really asking is how do they kind of start this process and not feel kind of cheated. And I think one of the things to remember as the partner is for most victims of sexual abuse, they really do believe that a lot of it is behind them, or they have not done the work to understand that this is really abuse. For a lot of people, they can't even put the right words to it. For some people, they don't even know, well, I was raped. That really was rape. That was abuse. So a big part of this is maybe reframing it so that you weren't cheated, but maybe your partner didn't even know, or your spouse didn't even know that this was going to be such a big thing in their life. For a lot of people, I think they feel like they've overcome it until they get into these relationships and something triggers them and they realize, oh no, this is a lot bigger of a problem. And for a lot of people, if sex doesn't feel right, or it's just not going well and it's continually not going well, and it doesn't feel right and it feels dirty or bad, or there's disgust with it, it oftentimes is the time to kind of take a look at maybe something more happened. Maybe I should see a therapist. Maybe it's time to kind of dig deeper into this and to figure out what's going on. And I think you can do that individually, or you can do that as a couple. And it's important to at least, I think, include your partner in what's going on, and to remember that you can still do a lot of safe things. You can do a lot of cuddling and kissing and hugging if that's safe for the other person, and go slow. But there's a lot of ways to still connect and to just remind themselves that it's a process and that it's getting better.
Thanks so much. I mean, this is a topic that's very sensitive, and you've handled it in a way that I think has put a lot of people at ease, and yet at the same time hasn't shied away from the difficulties either. And so thank you very much
You're
for talking
welcome.
with me.
Thank
and
you.
For people that would like to talk to you more, and you're one of several people in a group that's this AASECT certification.
So,
is that right?
Yes, it's we're certified sex therapists through the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and there is 5 of us here in Utah. And you can just go to the AASECT website and click on Find a Therapist and click on Utah, and all 5 of us that are certified here will pull up.
But for those who really enjoyed hearing from Shannon, let's finish up with, again, your name and contact information for those that would like to get in touch with you directly.
Sure. So my name, once again, is Shannon Hickman, And my business is Core Healing Counseling, and you can find me at corehealingcounseling.com, or also I can be reached at 801-554-0849.
Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you.